You want to know about the women's divisions? About what everyone's calling the biggest potential fight in women's MMA history. Sit down, because this isn't just about two fighters stepping into a cage. This is about everything I've been building in women's mixed martial arts for the last decade, and why some decisions keep me up at night thinking about legacy, timing, and what happens when you put two killers in the same weight class. People keep asking me about Amanda Nunes versus Kayla Harrison. They want dates. They want guarantees. They want me to promise them this super fight that everyone's been talking about since Kayla signed with us. Here's what I'll tell you, and this stays between us. Some fights are bigger than the moment they happen in. Some fights carry the weight of an entire division, an entire gender's place in this sport. And sometimes the pressure to deliver that kind of moment can make or break everything you've worked toward. I've been in this business long enough to recognize when something special is brewing, when two paths are destined to cross in a way that changes everything. But I've also been burned before by rushing into super fights before the timing was right, before both fighters were ready, before the story had been properly told. The difference between a legendary fight and a disappointing mismatch often comes down to patience, to understanding that the buildup is just as important as the actual combat. The phone call started the day Kayla Harrison signed with us. Agents, managers, media members, all asking the same question. When are you going to make the fight with Amanda? As if signing a contract automatically means stepping into the cage with the greatest female fighter who ever lived. As if Olympic gold medals and undefeated records guarantee success at the highest level of mixed martial arts. I had to slow everyone down, had to explain that big fights happen when they're supposed to happen, not when people think they should happen. But let me be clear about something. I want this fight as much as anybody. I see the potential. I understand the magnitude. I recognize that this could be the kind of moment that defines an entire era of women's MMA. When you've got the greatest of all time potentially facing off against someone who could be the future face of the sport, that's not something you take lightly. That's something you build properly, something you craft carefully, something you make sure delivers on every single expectation people have. Amanda Nunes walked into my life when women's MMA was still fighting for respect. Not just respect from fans, not just respect from media, but respect from the fighters themselves. Back then, we had Ronda Rousey carrying the entire women's bantamweight division on her shoulders, and when Ronda's world came crashing down, everybody thought that was it for women in the UFC. They thought the experiment was over, that women couldn't draw without that movie star appeal Ronda brought to the table. I remember sitting in meetings where executives questioned whether we should continue investing in women's divisions. The Ronda era had ended so abruptly, so violently, that people started second-guessing everything we'd built. Ticket sales dropped, pay-per-view numbers declined, and suddenly everyone was looking at women's MMA like it was some kind of failed experiment rather than recognizing it as a sport in transition. But I knew better. I knew we weren't seeing the end of something. We were seeing the beginning of a new era. Ronda had opened doors, had proved that women could headline major events and draw mainstream attention. What we needed wasn't another movie star, another crossover celebrity. What we needed was a pure fighter, someone who could carry the division on skill alone, someone who could make people forget about Hollywood and remember why they fell in love with fighting in the first place. Amanda was that fighter, even if nobody realized it at first. She wasn't flashy like Ronda. She didn't have the same media training or mainstream appeal. What Amanda had was something much more valuable. She was a complete mixed martial artist who got better every time she stepped into the octagon. While other fighters were trying to copy Ronda's approach, Amanda was developing her own style, her own identity, her own path to greatness. Then Amanda stepped up and did something nobody expected. She didn't just beat Ronda, she destroyed her. 48 seconds. That's all it took for Amanda to announce that the women's divisions weren't going anywhere, that there was a new sheriff in town, and this sheriff could hit like a heavyweight and move like a featherweight. But here's what most people don't understand about that night at UFC 207. I wasn't just watching Amanda Nunes knock out Ronda Rousey. I was watching the entire future of women's mixed martial arts get rewritten in real time. Amanda didn't stop there. She went and cleaned out bantamweight, then moved up to featherweight and cleaned that out too. She beat every legend we put in front of her. Miesha Tate, Valentina Shevchenko twice, Chris Cyborg, Holly Holm, Jermaine Durandamy. Champions, former champions, future Hall of Famers. Amanda Nunes turned into this wrecking ball that nobody could stop, and she did it without the Hollywood connection, without the mainstream media push, just by being the most complete female fighter we'd ever seen. But success in this business comes with complications. The better you get, the fewer people can challenge you. The more you dominate, the harder it becomes to find fights that matter, fights that move the needle, fights that justify putting someone of Amanda's caliber back in harm's way. Amanda's been asking for challenges worthy of her legacy, and honestly, for a while there, we were running out of women who could even make it interesting. That's not a knock on the division. It's just what happens when you have someone operating on Amanda's level. Enter Kayla Harrison, Olympic gold medalist in judo, undefeated professional record, two-time PFL lightweight champion. When Kayla became available, everybody in the MMA world knew we were looking at something special. This wasn't just another prospect signing with the UFC. This was the first woman since Ronda who brought legitimate world-class credentials from another combat sport, who had that combination of elite grappling and knockout power that makes people pay attention. The negotiations to bring Kayla to the UFC weren't simple. When you're dealing with someone of her caliber, someone with options, someone who's been the face of another major promotion, every detail matters. Kayla had built her reputation in PFL, had become their biggest star, had proved she could finish fights and draw attention. But the question that kept coming up in our internal discussions was simple. How good is she really? PFL is a solid organization. They put on good fights. They pay their fighters well. But it's not the UFC. The depth of competition, the level of athletes, the pressure that comes with performing on the biggest stage in mixed martial arts, those are all different animals. I've seen too many fighters who looked unstoppable in other organizations struggle when they made the jump to our level. The pace is faster, the technique is higher, the mental game is more demanding. But Kayla's different in ways that go beyond just her judo background. When she talks about fighting, when she discusses her goals and her approach to mixed martial arts, you can tell she understands what she's getting into. She's not some naive Olympic champion who thinks her credentials guarantee success in MMA. She knows she has to prove herself all over again, has to show that her skills translate to the highest level of the sport. The judo background is obviously huge. Olympic-level judo isn't just about throwing people. It's about timing, leverage, reading opponents, staying calm under pressure. Those are all skills that transfer directly to mixed martial arts, especially in the grappling-heavy women's divisions. But what impressed me most about Kayla wasn't her judo, wasn't her undefeated record, wasn't even her knockout power. It was her willingness to keep learning, to acknowledge that MMA is different from judo, to put in the work necessary to become a complete fighter. But here's where it gets complicated, and this is where my job gets interesting. Kayla Harrison isn't just talented, she's improving at the highest level of MMA. She's been fighting in PFL, which is a good organization, but it's not the UFC. The level of competition, the pressure, the spotlight, everything changes when you step into our octagon. I've seen Olympic champions struggle with the transition. I've seen undefeated records get shattered by fighters who understood the UFC game better than their more credentialed opponents. The business side of this equation is just as complex as the athletic side. Amanda Nunes is a proven pay-per-view draw, someone who can headline major events and deliver for our broadcast partners. Every time she fights, there's money on the line, not just for her, not just for the UFC, but for everyone involved in putting on these events. When you're talking about someone at Amanda's level, you can't afford to waste fights on opponents who might not be ready for the moment. I've had this conversation with Amanda's team multiple times. They understand the magnitude of a potential Kayla Harrison fight, but they also understand that Amanda has limited fights left in her career. She's not going to fight forever. She's not going to take unnecessary risks. And she's certainly not going to stake her legacy on someone who hasn't proven they belong in the same octagon with her. Amanda has earned the right to be selective, to only take fights that make sense for her career and her legacy. From Kayla's perspective, the situation is equally challenging. She signed with the UFC to face the best competition in the world, to prove that her success in PFL wasn't just because she was fighting inferior opponents. But the path to Amanda Nunes isn't as straightforward as some people think. The bantamweight division has established contenders who have been waiting years for their shot at the title. You've got women who have put together impressive winning streaks, who have beaten top-level competition, who have earned their place in line. The media pressure around this potential fight has been intense from day one. Every press conference, every interview, every social media post gets analyzed for clues about when the fight might happen. Reporters ask about it constantly, fans demand updates on social media, and both fighters get questioned about it wherever they go. That kind of pressure can actually work against making the fight happen, can create unrealistic expectations that make it harder to deliver something that satisfies everyone. But there's also an opportunity here that goes beyond just one fight. If Amanda and Kayla do eventually meet in the octagon, if the timing works out and both women are ready for that level of competition, it could redefine what women's MMA looks like going forward. We're talking about two different generations of female fighters, two different approaches to the sport, two different paths to greatness meeting at the highest level of competition. So when people started immediately calling for Amanda Nunes versus Kayla Harrison, when they started talking about this being the biggest women's fight in MMA history, I had to pump the brakes. Not because I don't think it could be huge, it absolutely could be, but because rushing into super fights before fighters prove themselves at our level is how you end up with disappointments, how you end up with fights that don't live up to the hype, how you damage both fighters' careers and the division's credibility. Kayla needed to show she belonged first. She needed to prove she could handle UFC-level competition, UFC-level pressure, UFC-level everything. That's not disrespect, that's business. That's protecting both fighters and making sure that when we do make the big fight, it lives up to what everyone expects it to be. Amanda Nunes has earned the right to only take fights that matter, fights that add to her legacy rather than risk it for someone who hasn't proven they can operate on her level. Meanwhile, Amanda's been dealing with her own questions. Retirement talk has been following her around for years. She's accomplished everything there is to accomplish in women's MMA. She's the greatest female fighter of all time, and that's not even debatable anymore. But greatness comes with a price. Every time she fights, she's risking everything she's built. One bad night, one perfectly timed shot from the right opponent, and decades of dominance can get erased by casual fans who only remember your last fight. I've seen this story before, too many times. Champions who stay too long, who take one fight too many, who let their competitive fire override their better judgment. Chuck Liddell getting knocked out repeatedly at the end of his career. Anderson Silva never quite recapturing the magic after the Chris Weidman fights. BJ Penn taking damage in fights he had no business being in. The hardest part of being a champion isn't winning the belt. It's knowing when to walk away from it. Amanda's situation is different, though, and that's what makes these decisions so complex. She's not showing obvious signs of decline. She's not getting knocked out by lesser opponents. She's not struggling to make weight or dealing with serious injuries. Amanda is still performing at an elite level, still dominating high-quality opponents, still looking like the best women's fighter in the world every time she steps into the octagon. But Father Time is undefeated in combat sports. It doesn't matter how good you are, how well you take care of yourself, how smart you fight. Eventually, the reflexes slow down, the chin becomes more vulnerable, the ability to perform under pressure starts to diminish. Amanda knows this as well as anyone. She's watched other champions struggle with these realities, has seen what happens when fighters stay too long in a sport that doesn't forgive mistakes. The conversations about her future have been ongoing for months. Amanda's team, her family, her coaches, everyone has opinions about what she should do next. Some people think she should retire while she's on top, cement her legacy as someone who never declined, never gave fans a reason to question her greatness. Other people think she should continue fighting as long as she's performing at this level, should maximize her earning potential while she still can. I've been in this position before with other champions who had nothing left to prove. Chuck Liddell didn't need to keep fighting when he was getting knocked out. Anderson Silva probably should have walked away after the Chris Weidman fights. Sometimes the hardest part of my job is knowing when to let legends be legends, when to protect them from themselves and from the young, hungry fighters who want to make their name by taking down the king. But Amanda's different. Amanda's still hungry. Amanda still wants the big fights, still wants the challenges, still wants to prove that nobody in the women's divisions can hang with her. And that fire, that competitive drive, that's what makes this whole situation so interesting. Because Kayla Harrison has that same fire, that same belief that she's destined for greatness in MMA, just like she was in judo. The timing has to be perfect, though. Amanda's not getting any younger. She's been through wars, she's taken damage, and Father Time is undefeated in combat sports. If we're going to make this fight, if we're going to give the fans what they're asking for, it has to happen while both women are still in their primes, while the fight still means something special. But perfect timing in this business is more art than science. You're dealing with training camps, injuries, personal issues, contract negotiations, broadcast schedules, venue availability, 1,000 different variables that all have to align for a major fight to happen. And when you're talking about a fight of this magnitude, when you're talking about something that could define both fighters' legacies, you can't afford to get the timing wrong. I've learned over the years that the biggest fights often take longer to materialize than people expect. The super fights that seem obvious, that fans demand immediately, those are usually the ones that require the most careful planning. You have to build the story properly. You have to make sure both fighters are ready not just physically but mentally. You have to ensure that the stakes are high enough to justify the hype. The women's bantamweight division is in a unique position right now. On one hand, you have the greatest champion in the history of the weight class, someone who has cleaned out the division multiple times over. On the other hand, you have this influx of new talent, women who grew up watching Amanda dominate and who want to prove they belong in the same conversation. Kayla Harrison is just the most prominent example of this new generation, but she's not the only one. This creates both opportunities and challenges for how we structure the division going forward. Do we fast-track elite prospects like Kayla because of their credentials and fan interest? Do we maintain traditional ranking systems that reward consistency and time served? Do we create special circumstances for unique situations, or do we treat everyone the same regardless of their background? These aren't easy decisions, and they're not decisions that make everyone happy. When you fast-track someone, you upset the fighters who have been working their way through the rankings. When you stick to traditional systems, you risk wasting opportunities to make the fights that fans really want to see. When you create special circumstances, you set precedents that other fighters will expect to benefit from in the future. The pressure from all sides is constant. Amanda wants meaningful fights that add to her legacy. Kayla wants opportunities to prove she belongs at the highest level. Other contenders want the chances they've earned through years of hard work. Fans want the biggest possible fights regardless of rankings or traditional matchmaking protocols. Media wants storylines that generate interest and coverage. Broadcast partners want fights that drive viewership and subscription numbers. My job is to balance all of these competing interests while making sure that the long-term health of the division remains strong. That means sometimes making unpopular decisions, sometimes telling people they need to wait longer than they want to wait, sometimes prioritizing the bigger picture over immediate gratification. The conversations about Amanda versus Kayla have evolved over the past several months. Initially, it was all speculation and wishful thinking from fans and media. Then it became more serious discussions between the fighters' representatives and our matchmaking team. Now we're at the stage where both women understand that this fight is a real possibility, where the logistics and timing are being seriously considered, where the business side is being worked out behind the scenes. But even with all of that progress, there are no guarantees in this business. Injuries happen, circumstances change, better opportunities arise. Amanda could decide that the risks aren't worth the rewards. Kayla could struggle with the transition to UFC-level competition. Other fighters could emerge who present more compelling matchups. The landscape of women's MMA could shift in ways that make this particular fight less relevant or less appealing. That uncertainty is part of what makes this business both exciting and frustrating. You can plan for months or years to make a particular fight happen, only to have it fall apart at the last minute because of factors beyond your control. You can have everything lined up perfectly, the fighters willing, the venue booked, the promotional campaign ready to launch, and then something unexpected happens that changes everything. The women's divisions have come so far since those early days when people questioned whether women could headline UFC events. Amanda Nunes proved they could. She proved they could draw money. They could deliver exciting fights. They could carry the promotion just like any male champion. Now we're at a point where a potential women's super fight is getting the same kind of attention and anticipation as the biggest men's fights. That transformation didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen by accident. It happened because women like Amanda were willing to step up when the spotlight was on them, were willing to deliver when the pressure was highest, were willing to prove their worth fight after fight, year after year. Amanda didn't just win fights. She changed perceptions, broke down barriers, and created opportunities for the next generation of female fighters. Kayla Harrison represents that next generation. She represents the future of women's MMA, the evolution of the sport, the continuation of what Amanda started. If and when these two women meet in the octagon, it's not just about determining a winner between them. It's about passing the torch from one era to the next, about honoring what's been built while looking forward to what's possible. The stakes couldn't be higher. For Amanda, it's about cementing her legacy with one more defining victory, about proving that even at this stage of her career, she remains the standard by which all other female fighters are measured. For Kayla, it's about validation, about proving that her success wasn't just a product of fighting inferior competition, about establishing herself as the new face of women's MMA. For the sport itself, it's about demonstrating that women's mixed martial arts has reached a level where individual fights can capture the attention of the entire MMA world, where female athletes can generate the same kind of excitement and anticipation that has traditionally been reserved for male champions. That's the kind of progress that changes everything, that opens doors for future generations of female fighters. I've been asked countless times when this fight will happen, and the honest answer is that I don't know yet. What I do know is that when it does happen, when all the pieces fall into place and both women are ready for that kind of moment, it's going to be something special. It's going to be the kind of fight that people talk about for years, the kind of performance that defines careers and changes perceptions. Until then, we keep working, keep planning, keep preparing for the moment when everything aligns perfectly. Both fighters know what's at stake. Both understand the magnitude of what this fight could mean for their careers and for women's MMA as a whole. Both are preparing as if the fight could be announced tomorrow, while understanding that it might still be months away. That's the reality of putting together superfights at this level. The planning starts long before any official announcements. The preparation happens while contracts are still being negotiated, and the pressure builds even before dates are confirmed. By the time fans hear about these fights officially, months or even years of behind-the-scenes work have already gone into making them possible. This business has taught me that the best fights are worth waiting for, that rushing into super fights before the timing is right usually leads to disappointment, and that patience often produces better results than immediate gratification. Amanda Nunes versus Kayla Harrison has the potential to be the biggest women's fight in MMA history, but only if we do it right, only if both fighters are ready, and only if the timing aligns with what's best for everyone involved. The conversations continue, the planning moves forward, and the anticipation builds. When this fight finally happens, and I believe it will happen, it's going to deliver on every expectation people have built around it. That's what great fighters do. That's what meaningful fights accomplish. That's what the future of women's MMA looks like.